Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Millennial Smark, and I'm giving you the slop, the whole slop, and nothing but the slop. So, link is down in the description box below. We're going to read this article real quick, but just to kind of give you a bit of context, why I'm doing this video is because I'm seeing everybody going back and forth on Twitter, and you can probably say it's a bit of tribalism that's maybe linked into this as to why they're reacting to Will Ospreay and the manner of how they're reacting to Will Ospreay. Some people are taking his side, and they're calling people e-drones. If you don't agree with them, then it's the other side who's saying that what Will Ospreay is saying is a bunch of bullshit, that it doesn't really fit that perspective as much as he wants to make it out to sound. People are comparing it somewhat to Carmella. We're going to get the gist of it because I'm going to read this live with you guys. Will Ospreay feels critics of his in-ring spots would be praising those spots if he had chosen to go to WWE. There was a conversation about criticism of in-ring spots in the Paul Levesque comments. The latest guest to sit down with Chris Van Vliet for an interview was Will Ospreay. As their chat moved along, a conversation took place about the criticisms of Ospreay's in-ring style and some of the spots he does. Ospreay was asked if he feels it's unfair that some spots are not as criticized by the public if they happen under the WWE banner. He added that those same critics of his will be praising those spots he does if he had chosen to go to WWE. And I quote from Will Ospreay, "No, I don't think it's unfair that people aren't as critical of certain spots if they happen in WWE. But then, if I had gone there, they'd be fucking winking into fucking tissues over me. But it's the same. That's why you have to separate it, otherwise you drive yourself insane. Wrestling is my passion. It's my job, most importantly. But if you have something that you're passionate about, you really don't care about what people are saying who have never impacted your career in your entire life. Once upon a time, they were big hits that anyone that's ever complained about AEW, like the grifters or whatever they're called, I don't know if that's the right term. That's what everyone says. But even if they say something, they're not impacting our show. We're the second most profitable wrestling company of all time. That's not talked about enough, and everyone wants to dig on it, and I get it. There's things we generally improve on, and I think it's fair to listen to some criticism. But for me, I don't lose sleep over anyone trying to tell me how to wrestle because now, look at me. I'm a fucking idiot. I know I am, but I've carved out this little lane for myself. I was destined to be someone that would have either worked at McDonald's or pushed trolleys at Tesco's. But because I grafted at this, and because I learned the trade over in England and over in Japan, and my enthusiasm and my passion comes over here, I don't let things, if it's just like, oh, this is shit. Why? Because it's shit. Well, that's not fair. If you give me criticism and you give me points that I can work on, then I'll try my best to work on it. I'm not gonna get it right away, but I think that's the stuff that people need to speak more about. Now, this is all a reflection based off of this also. During WrestleMania XL week, or WrestleMania 40, Paul Triple H Levesque appeared on the Pat McAfee show and made a comment about talents running from the grind and being glad he did not bring those talents into WWE. Ospreay reacted the following week on AEW Dynamite. In this new interview, he said it was relayed to him from other people that Levesque was talking about him. He said he's never spoken to Levesque directly. Ospreay's representation was in contact with WWE during negotiations. There was a Pro Wrestling Evolve, or Eve, I guess, Eve? I'm gonna say Eve, I'm retarded. Show that Ospreay was present, what the hell? There was a Pro Wrestling Eve show that Ospreay was present at, and a match, goddamn ads, a match took place where wrestlers dressed up as characters and someone dressed up as Triple H. Ospreay gave that individual a pedigree. He joked he might start doing the move, and he reflected off of that too. He didn't say my name, but like Ospreay said in reference to Triple H's comments about being glad he didn't get talents who were not in it for the grind, he was talking about me, is what Ospreay is referencing. And I've got people that I won't throw under the bus that's saying, yeah, it was about me, meaning Ospreay. I won't throw anyone's names under the bus, but it was about me. I'm not taking it personally and like, oh, that hurt my feelings. It's just kind of like, all right, you take a friendly jab at me, I'll take one back. There's nothing horrible about it. I don't hate the guy. I've never met him. How can I hate someone that I've never even met? No, I've never spoken to him. I have an agency, talk to everyone, and I've told everybody about my situation and why I want to remain in the UK, which is why that kind of hurt me a little bit. Not to the point where it keeps me up at night. I was like, okay, you take a jab at me, I'll take one back, and then that's it. We're done. And then someone was at this show that I was doing some stuff with Pro Wrestling Eve, and they do this thing called the Multiverse Rumble, and everybody dresses up as characters, and somebody dressed up as Triple H. I walked in here and I went, I've got to do it now, haven't I? Because it's funny, and if anyone doesn't think it's funny, then I can't tell you what your humor is. But my humor is, this is hilarious. I'm gonna do it. If I got in trouble about this whole instance, I don't understand why I got in trouble for it. I mean, I have an idea about it, but it was an amazing pedigree. I might start doing it because it's funny. And then it starts talking about his upcoming match with Kyle Fletcher. No, and there's some things, and I know he's saying, oh, people who talk about these kind of things, they never levy criticism about me. So we're gonna say the Triple H stuff for last, and it's not as if I haven't talked about this already when it comes to Will Ospreay. Now, obviously, for Will Ospreay's point of view, he kind of feels that people are bitching for the sake of bitching, and that might be the case. So I can only speak for me. I grew up in a different era. I grew up in an era of professional wrestling where things were done for a purpose. Things that were extravagant in nature were typically saved for moments where it can linger in the person's mind. I don't think anyone ever gets this about professional wrestling. You know, there's a great video that I seen on Twitter with Jim Cornette, explaining this process. It's pretty recent, where he was essentially talking about professional wrestling, and it's super easy to get. You know, it's not that hard of a concept. You know what I mean? It's good guy versus bad guy, and if you're invested enough, you're gonna want to pay money to see the good guy beat the hell out of the bad guy because you don't like the bad guy and you want to see the bad guy get his comeuppance. That's professional wrestling right there in a nutshell. Now, unfortunately, in the newer generation, they've taken to the spectacle of making professional wrestling, as I talked about this in the past, they take the bare minimum and then they exploit it to make it feel as if it's the most important concept in professional wrestling. That's the problem that I have with it. And unfortunately, that bare minimum happens to be the in-ring stuff. It happens to be the actual wrestling in itself, which is an important component in professional wrestling. It's a tool that is necessary in professional wrestling for obvious reasons that doesn't have to be stated. You need something to act out in order to get over the point that you're trying to get across as far as the conclusion based off of the actions that you're telling within your story, right? And every movie that you watch that happens to be an action sequence, like obviously there's going to be movements, there's going to be actions done in order to convey the rhetoric that you're displaying that people are engaging with. The problem though is that the rhetoric point with guys like Ospreay in this generation in general, they don't focus on enough. That's the problem, right? And Will Ospreay is only like a year younger than me. So he grew up in the same era that I grew up in. And I would just like to know, with him and how he got into professional wrestling, would he have gotten into professional wrestling strictly off of the moves? I don't believe that to be the case. Now, maybe it's the case, and maybe I shouldn't imply that with Will Ospreay, but maybe I can at least generally speak about professional wrestling when it comes to the fans, and I can tell you that the majority of people who got into professional wrestling, maybe if it was the ring entrance and the music, maybe if it was the pomp and circumstances and the presentation that they were watching at the time, maybe it can have something to do with how the wrestler looks. They could be big, you know, they could be imposing, they can look scary like The Undertaker, they can look like a superhero like Rey Mysterio. That's what they initially engage with. And maybe over time, as you start to falter with that gimmick aspect as to what got you into professional wrestling, you start to get more into components that you feel make it more relatable for you, being the moves in itself. But that relatability that you had to dig deep into, that's not going to be something that's going to engage off rip with the audience, right? Maybe with the IWC because they're already indebted into professional wrestling, but not overall. It's like when you play a video game, you know what I mean? Like you're gonna do the bare minimum in order to get used to it. But once you get used to it, that used to it part may get boring with you after a while, and you start going to more advanced stuff so it can stay intriguing to you throughout the process of playing that video game, right? Or even in the bare minimum playing a video game, it's like playing story mode and then you beat it, and then eventually you jump into universe mode, and now you have a sandbox mode that can make the game last a lot longer. But the game mechanics, the presentation, you have to have a reason to want to buy the game to begin with before you start dwelling into more of the advanced stuff. That's the criticism that is being laid upon your generation and people like you, Will Ospreay, which I'm not even gonna just completely hold Will Ospreay accountable for all those instances that have to be negative about professional wrestling, because it's not as if Will Ospreay isn't a credit as far as what he brings to the table. Say what you will, and I know I'm gonna get some disagreement in the comments. It is what it is. I think Will Ospreay does have charisma. I think Will Ospreay is not that bad on the microphone. If for anything else, he's consistent. No, he's not a Dusty Rhodes. No, he's not a Roddy Piper. No, he's not Austin. No, he's not Raw. Hell, even on the same roster, he's not even an MJF. But he conveys his message. He relates his message. He gets his point across. I barely hear him stumble on his words. And he gets people to want to, at least for anything else, check out what he's involved in. And I respect that. That's more than I can say for the majority of the people within your generation, Will. But the problem does rely on the fact that it almost comes off that you do more, like you're more engaged with your moves that can only take you so far, and not realizing that the professional wrestling industry currently at the moment is surrounded by people with that same mentality. Whereas you should be exploiting more of what you're not that bad at, to be perfectly honest with you. You should be exploiting that more often to engage people, to have a reason to want to see your moves. All the biggest moments, all the biggest things that ever happened in professional wrestling history, I can count on one hand how many of them happened to do with the sequence of moves that were happening in the match. I'll put it to you like this. In my opinion, when looking at the overarching of professional wrestling, the only match that I could think of that is so famous that it kind of goes a little bit into pop culture as far as sequence of moves are considered is maybe something like a Macho Man Randy Savage versus a Ricky Steamboat. That's the first of its caliber to do something like that on a mainstream level. Keyword, mainstream. But even then, people didn't necessarily come to the match caring for the spots being done. They eventually were okay with that, but they came because it was Macho Man Randy Savage, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and Ricky Steamboat, another one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. And when they seen the match, they were fine with it, but it was because of Hogan and Andre and the appeal of WrestleMania 3. It was because of the angle that they produced when Ricky Steamboat got his throat fucking smashed by Savage. All these things culminated, and then the match gave them something more, but they were relating initially with the story. And don't get it twisted, this is not just an AEW problem, this is also a WWE problem. Now, granted, it's less of a WWE problem compared to AEW, but it's still a lingering problem in WWE underneath Triple H's umbrella. And don't get it twisted, on the latter portions of Vince McMahon's umbrella also. But that's the criticism, Will. That's the criticism. And maybe it's not all just you, like I talked about last night when focusing on MJF. You know, like, you can be just like Will and this could be a negative, or you could be like MJF and it's overacting. His over-reliance on doing too much based off the character can come off as cringe. This comes back to your company not giving you something to work with in regards to engaging stories that people can relate to want to see you cut that promo. And then eventually see the presentation. And then eventually see your moves. But you're skipping too many steps and you're relying on just one aspect to carry you along your adventure as far as what's going to get you into a prominent spot as far as the legends are considered, and you're not there. That's the criticism. And if you want to work on it. But it seems as if you get that criticism, and maybe you don't initially. Maybe you're jaded by all the trolls who have made it a point to not even get you to even want to see the criticism. But that is the initial criticism. Maybe some people can actually, articulate it, and maybe they don't, but that's the initial criticism. That's what it is. And to follow that up with the whole Triple H stuff, you sit back and you say things like, oh, I'm not offended. Oh, this, that, this, and the third. But it does come off that way. And it's not just you. It's a lot of people in AEW. And maybe you can call it grifting as far as AEW using that in order to, get some clicks, get some likes, get some views off of it, because they're now using WWE name to stand on the pedestal, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do it with you guys the majority of the time. Hell, I'm a wrestling channel, a wrestling commentary channel. I rely on the names of WWE and AEW to get my channel over. That's not the problem. You say that you're not offended, but at the same time, here's you using that point in order to go after WWE. And if it was a one-time occurrence, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But unfortunately for you, you work for a company that does it on a consistent basis. And again, it's one thing to take a shot at WWE. It's another thing to over-rely on them while still trying to consistently put across this veil of illusion that you're the alternative. Do you understand? Do you get it? That's what people have a problem with as far as you talking about Triple H. It's not to say that you shouldn't give him a receipt, but the receipt that you're giving him is coming from a place. And again, this is just me outside looking in. It's coming from a place that people, as I said before, that word, have used and over relied on in order to get themselves over. So the distinction, it can't be made. Because now you just fit the category of wrestlers who have to use WWE to get themselves over, while being in the company that's trying to present itself as an alternative. It's not a shot, it's over-reliance. You get it? It's no different. For an example, right? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, I'm working at my job, right? And I'm doing my thing. And I see some people who are not doing their thing, and I'm trying to get into the good graces of my boss. Even though what I'm doing at my job is a credit to what is making that department a better environment because I'm working there, me constantly snitching on people for doing the wrong things in order to get into the good graces of my boss, and that right there, me doing that, is the number one thing that is going to get me in the good graces of my boss. Doing it over time gets people jaded. It gets you alienated. And now what you actually brought to the table, which was initially a good thing, is now overshadowed by you consistently using this tool to put on a platform in order to get yourself over with your boss. You understand where I'm coming from? So now, when you actually have legitimate trouble with somebody, and actually this is a case that could be made that could eliminate this problem, and you are now the cause of it, and that can probably actually lead you into legitimate good graces with your boss. Now it's inside the same bubble as you bitching about everybody else for the little things that got you into the supposed good graces of your boss to begin with, without even recognizing the entire time they are now annoyed by your constant complaining. And your constant complaining now overshadows the stuff that you brought to the table that was a good thing. And now that you have a legitimate complaint that in any other situation would get you in their good graces, is now bottled up and grouped in with all your other complaints. And now you're seen as nothing more than this versus what you actually brought to the table. You see what I mean? It's a bunch of things that come into all of this that make you and your company seem very offended by even the slightest criticism. That's the entire thing. And if you had to, in my opinion, define it with one word, it comes off as supreme entitlement. Your fans, the sickos, if you want to call them, the wrestlers, your boss, you guys come off as entitled. You did not have to put the work in that other wrestlers had to do to pave the road for you to have the spot to exploit what they did in order to get over one criteria in professional wrestling that does not engage the audience that they built. You are destroying, in their eyes, and honestly, even in my eyes, you're destroying their work that they paved the road for you because you don't want to do the hard work. And in the case of AEW and Tony Khan as a whole, you are now in a spot. You said WCW earlier about their position, right? When you reflected off the fact that you're the second most profitable company in wrestling history. WCW was not initially WCW. WCW took 40 years, arguably, when you talk about their foundation coming from the NWA. It took 40 years to get into that spot, and you guys just day one making it to that spot, and you have nothing to show for it. Again, all of this comes off as entitled. Your behavior comes off as supremely entitled, which is pretty much the conclusion. And honestly, that's the broadening of how people look at this generation as a whole. This current generation, the one that's being marketed to, Generation Z, if you want to call it that. And even younger millennials. You can even throw me in there if you want to. As far as people who, within my generation, it's all entitlement. Nothing was worked at as much as the previous generation, and the things that they did in order to make this seem prevalent enough for you to even want to get inside. You're now ruining everything that they built up because you don't want to do the hard work. But supposedly because you're so good at the lowest form of engagement that they didn't even necessarily focus on, you think because you're so supremely good at that you're owed everything. Now, maybe this might go over some people's heads. Maybe some people might care. I don't know. But that's the problem, Will. That's the problem with the critiques. That's the problem with the Triple H comments that you, for some reason, are offended by. Yes, you are. People who aren't offended don't go out of their way to talk about the situation. You say a tit for tat. I don't see it that way. I see a person who feels that they have to clap back in order to save their pride. That's the situation. Now, you can take it and you can run with it, or you can just ignore it and pretend that what I'm saying right now is all just nonsense tribalistic stuff. That's up to you. But for my audience, I like to get some feedback on what I just said. So let your comments be known down in the comment section below. How did you feel about Will Ospreay? How did you feel about what I say in response to Will Ospreay? I don't have an ego on me. I'm not saying that Will Ospreay is going to hear this video. If he does, I come at this in good faith. Honestly, you can hear my tone of voice compared to my tone of voice in all my other videos. This is all good faith because I feel like Will Ospreay legitimately wants to have a legitimate discussion about this. So let me be the one to kick it off, if it means anything. But with that being said, my name is Devontae, aka Millennial Smart, and I'll be catching you guys later on tonight when I go out of my way to upload 2K25 as soon as I figure out how to upload 2K25. We'll get to that, okay? Check it out on my miscellaneous videos, by the way, if you're watching this in the future. But with that being said, I'm out. I'll be catching you guys later. A deuces and a P ice.